It looks like it's me, so I can go ahead. So past 2 weeks we've been looking at cleaning up maintainers on the specs because we're making pretty good progress in the working group for reference types. So there was a PR that removed 2 of the 7 maintainers on image specs, and now there are 5. And I had proposed for Sajay and Brandon to be put on there. I think their work speaks for themselves, but people were then commenting on the thread. What does it mean to like be accepted as a maintainer? Who can nominate? Rose had put a big comment on with good criteria. Ultimately, I think like a nomination from somebody within OCI should be pretty important, but maybe we can provide like as we're putting up these PRs for nominating someone, like kind of their accolades, so that people can look at the history and be like, oh yeah, that's why. And I'm also unclear on to get a new maintainer if it's a quorum or what's the process there.
Is there a priority for criteria, like what folks should look at first?
I think no, and that's kind of the question. So I'll try and pull up the comment, but I had basically proposed Sajay, and then somebody had commented, not that Sajay's not going to make a good fit, but like, how could I get involved? And I think there's not a good guideline on like how people can get involved. And I think part of the problem is that we aren't getting things reviewed and merged. But I think Rose put together like a bunch of bullet points. And then there was another issue where Akihiro had posted something about time zones where like these calls are not doable in Japan. So maybe there's other criteria we can look at that's not just coming to these calls. But I think just writing them down is what we should probably do.
Is code contribution a must?
I think it's really just an open discussion. I don't know. I don't think there is a must right now. It's who do the maintainers want in. I think with image spec specifically, if you have a commit on there, it's very rare just because it's had inactivity. So like somebody pointed out, said like Sajay didn't have a commit, but that doesn't mean that he hasn't been looking at this stuff for a very, very long time. So I don't know. Phil, are you here? Is there a good place to start with this? I don't know.
Yeah. Well, first of all, just to add some color, because I think it was Valentin Rothberg who commented on Sajay's proposal, and I don't know if folks remember, but I just went back to try and figure out the time frame. But last spring, so almost exactly a year ago, we were kind of we were in a worse quandary that we had almost no like active image maintainers. And so we sort of did some, there was like a switch made, or actually, I don't think that went through. There's like a proposal, there was a call, and so at least Tycho, Valentin, and there was a replace. I guess that was Jason Bazan with John Johnson. So like we did this kind of big like, hey, let's get this figured out, and that kind of has helped us limp along a little better. And I think we're just kind of back to where that we knew that we didn't sort of clean up the whole process because we still had a few folks that were totally inactive. And so I think your PR that's now merged fixed that problem. But now we have the issue where like 3 people a year ago said, hey, I'll be involved. And at the end, we kind of said, no, actually, now that we kind of clean things up, like we're good for now. And we closed those PRs. And so now I think Valentin is like, well, that's weird because now there's 2 more proposals that are kind of like what we did last year. And I guess I'm wrong. Did he come in? Oh, I don't know where he commented that. That was on your move in active.
Yeah, it's the crossed out one somewhere in there.
Oh God, yeah, okay,
but yeah.
okay, I see it. Yep, I see it now. So I think that's what generated the like, oh, well, I guess we need to have some kind of decision around how do we decide who should be up for maintainership or what are the requirements. So that, I think that's kind of the backstory of why there's like, oh, wait, we did this last year and we said no to a bunch of people. And now maybe we're going to say yes to different people. Which, I think what we're bumping into now is that just like any open source community, there's not like a super easy way to say, I mean, unless it's a very fast moving project with tons of code contributions, like specs just don't have, like, I think your comment was right on that, Sajay and Brandon had been here like very involved for a long time, but that doesn't translate into sort of usual things that we see in open source projects where we can count commits or PRs or issues or whatever. So I think that's the sticking point here is like, how do we come up with a criteria that makes sense for the kinds of activity we're doing right now? Josh, yeah, I think you have your hand.
Yeah, if someone else wants to jump in, the one thing I've been thinking with this is like, it is really difficult to measure. But I do think the common thread in most cases is that other people in open containers feel strongly about the person. So there's kind of just like the soft, like how you feel about it thing. So I'm wondering if we can put as just like a baseline, must have a nomination from a member of any maintainer on any open containers repo, because then that at least shows that somebody knows that you're doing something in some area. So like someone on image spec may not know the things that people are doing in the working group, but that would be a valid, someone from the working group could propose someone. And then for people from the outside, they can try to, buddy up with, make friends with people on the inside to get that nomination if they're interested.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's what raises an interesting point is like, we have an interesting community in that we're not, like, there's distribution spec, there's image spec, there's the working group, there's even tangential projects, there's people building registries around these specs. And like the group of people that actually you could take this meeting as a proxy for like the kinds of people who are interested in these topics is a huge superset of like the 5 maintainers of image spec today, which is like, at least what we're talking about today is image spec. And so that makes it tricky because it's only those 5 people who have authority to approve or deny an addition or removal. But this group of people that gathers, and again, there's a whole separate topic we probably should talk about, that Akihiro, Valentin, others feel kind of disconnected because this is not a workable time for them for the most part. But separating from that, like this group that gathers and the people we see kind of actively involved in these discussions is not always related to the 5 image spec maintainers. And so that's kind of an interesting disconnect that I think makes us different than like, I don't know, Container D or the Moby project or some aspect of Kubernetes, where the people that gather and that work on a single project are all kind of in a similar sphere. Whereas here we have a bunch of constituencies, I think. Nisha?
So I have a suggestion about the time zone difference. In other working groups that I've been in, there's usually a representative from one time zone, like there are 2 meetings for the 2 different time zones, and a representative from one time zone will be in the other time zone. And that representative is usually someone in leadership, like someone who knows what's going on in one time zone, and they basically give a rundown of what's happening in the other time zone, collect notes, and then put that in meeting notes for the other time zone to pick up. Maybe we could duplicate this meeting for a different time zone. I'll volunteer if nobody wants to, wake up early or stay up late.
Yeah, I mean, from an idea perspective, like I think that's great. I mean, I think that is, we've had, well, it's been several years ago now. At some point, we had some period of time where we alternated or we tried a different time. But if you do duplicate, I think you're correct that there has to be like somebody that draws the line between the 2. Otherwise, you end up with 2 very disconnected groups discussing potentially very different things. So yeah, I like that idea, and I guess, yeah, I think it's up to like having someone willing to be that person to connect the dots.
Anyone else have thoughts?
I'll just say another solution to the time zone problem is to do more asynchronously and more. I mean, I think we're pretty good about, well, as much as discussion happens, it can happen on Slack or can happen on mailing lists, and that way we sort of reduce the importance of this meeting or of any synchronous, Zoom meetings. That's another approach. I don't know. It's not necessarily one or the other, but more asynchronous communication on Slack and issues.
So Jason, in order to do that, someone has to take, like, we have to take copious notes. And
or have this meeting less often, or have fewer fewer synchronous Zoom meetings in general is another approach.
So you think that most of the conversation could happen on Slack for other folks to pick up?
I don't know if I would advocate strongly for it, but it's another solution I've seen work for the problem of you know, this weekly meeting is not accessible to people in Japan, for instance. If instead of this weekly meeting, we had a monthly synchronous Zoom call and any other business happened on Slack and email and issues, that could be more amenable to other time zones.
So like an alternating time zone thing. So 1 week we have it in in the Americas time zone, AMER, and the other one we have it in APAC.
That works if someone is willing to, like you said, both. If someone in the APAC time zone is willing to facilitate and lead that meeting, and if we have someone, and either they very meticulously take notes and that other folks read, or that we have a person whose job is to be that bridge, or not job, responsibility is to be that bridge. I just think that's a lot potentially to ask of folks, unless someone is rushing to be that person. I wouldn't. I am unable to be that person personally.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead, Nisha.
That might actually work where we have another meeting, but someone has chaired by a person in the other time zone, but they have to, you know, take down enough notes to be able to communicate with the folks in this time zone.
That would work if someone is willing to be that person. I don't know if, I mean, by the nature of this meeting, no one in this meeting is that person. So it's tough to sort of volunteer Akihiro to be that person while he's not here to defend himself.
I guess the other twist on that is like, you know, Alexa has been on the TOB calls last year when we had a few of them. We picked a time that worked with Australia. Jason, you're right. We don't have them here, so we can't ask them to do this. But like, I could see Alexa saying, "Yeah, like I'll lead a APAC time, you know, OCI call." But I think one of the interesting twists is that like Alexa's focus is like Run C. Like Run C just had a release a few days ago, yesterday, that Alexa led. Like his mind is like around Run C and the runtime spec. Like if he led a call, you know, not that he can't cover other topics, but like, you know, his head is more in that side of the OCI. And so it's kind of interesting that this call has tended to follow kind of where the bulk of the community has gone. So initially, like in 5 years ago, this call had a lot to do with the runtime spec. And then, you know, we get started into distribution a couple years ago, and a lot of the people who joined this call were working on distribution. And so the other thing is like, maybe we're also kind of expecting, I mean, the title of this call is the OCI Weekly Developers Discussion, or whatever we title it. And it's really been for about a year or two just about distribution topics and image topics and artifacts. And so that's another, you know, and sorry, I'll answer this question in the chat since I'm talking, but you know, that's up for debate. Like it was a suggestion, it was a suggestion in the PR that started, or the sorry, where's that link? Minimum criteria for new maintainers, issue number 912. So Rose Judge commented in here. I'll post it in the chat. you know, that's potentially a minimum. And I think what Akihiro said and what also Valentin said in another forum, like that's kind of a tough requirement to put on people who, again, because of time zones, could not participate here. So
Yeah,
that's
if it is a requirement, we need to do better about making that accessible to folks.
Right,
But
right.
I would say we could just not make it a requirement, right? Like unless there is a groundswell of folks in other time zones that want to make another time for this meeting. Another solution to that problem is to just not make it part of the requirement.
Yeah. And I guess, you know, my point about kind of the flow of this meeting's topics and discussion, like if we were to have a sort of worldwide friendly either rotation or once a month and have two versions of it, like I think there's a whole question. We can't even say that this is about maintainership in all OCI projects because, you know, Run C has their own set of maintainers who obviously collaborate without ever coming to this call, and they're part of the OCI. So, you know, this is kind of a particular topic that we've been trying to solve about image spec itself, and even the requirements we put together, you know, by the OCI charter, that the people joining this call don't get to decide for the projects. It's the maintainers. So yeah, Nisha.
So it seems to me that the runtime spec and the image spec are very closely related. So would it help to have a runtime spec maintainer like weigh in on image spec changes?
I don't know if we can say that in the general case of all image spec changes. Like for example, the type of image spec changes we're talking about for reference types in particular have no bearing on runtime spec. Like runtime spec is expected to, I think, as far as I know, is expected to just completely ignore the new field we would propose.
Okay, so then that's reason to believe that if we make like maintainer decisions in image spec, part of that is that the maintainer should be able to understand if it impacts either runtime or distribution.
Yeah, I mean, it might be worth having a runtime spec person chime in to say officially on the record, you know, with the powers vested in them, that this change has no bearing on runtime spec. Just so that we can sort of check the box that someone from runtime spec looked at it and says that it doesn't matter. There will also be changes in the future. You know, presumably it's some type of change that is only related between image spec and runtime spec, and the distribution spec is expected to just pass these things around on, you know, blindly move this field from here to here. In that case, it might be useful for someone from distribution spec to chime in on that change and say, yep, no, we have nothing to do with this.
Diana?
So I'll put my runtime spec maintainer hat on. I would say that all the maintainers of the runtime spec have been involved in the OCI long enough that while changes to the image spec don't necessarily affect the runtime spec, their opinion is probably at least useful. It's been like, I've been sad for months and months and months that there aren't more runtime spec maintainers on this call. But I think part of that is because the topics have been focused on image spec and distribution spec for so long that it doesn't necessarily feel worth some of their time to join this call and spend time in this call saying nothing, right? When it's not like directly relevant, even though their opinion is interesting and useful and they've been around OCI and have useful opinions around OCI, like it's, I don't know, it's hard. So I guess That's the long way of saying, yes, I think their opinions are useful, but I don't think they're more useful than anyone else who's been in this call for months and months and months, or been watching the GitHub repos or involved in Slack or whatever.
So then, Tianan, do you think that with regards to maintainership, like current participants would be able to make that decision without involvement from runtime spec maintainers or even like distribution spec maintainers?
Which decision?
Maintainers,
So like adding new image spec maintainers.
yes.
I don't know. I think having maintainership on an OCI project is essentially a way for the OCI at large to say it has some degree of trust in this person in general. So I believe that, in my opinion, that holds some weight for, like, say, if I proposed a new maintainer to the image spec, I think it holds more weight than someone who's never been to the meetings proposing someone as a maintainer to the image spec, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense to me.
But I wouldn't say that me proposing a new maintainer to the image spec holds as much weight as an existing image spec maintainer saying, hey, this person should also be an image spec maintainer. So there's definitely varying degrees here.
And so what happens when there are no image spec maintainers to make that call?
Then we make Phil take it to the TOB.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think we have that problem at the moment because we now have 5 entries in the list that are at least around, and we know they're, they're paying attention for the most part.
Yeah, I think for me, at least, the thing that's hard about that is not what to do in that situation, but how to recognize that that's the situation we're in. How do we know that the image spec maintainers are totally AWOL and not just this one GitHub notification got lost in their inbox? Because that's a real thing that happens to all of us, I would imagine. Certainly me.
I have no response to that beyond, repeated comments that image spec maintainers are unavailable to review PRs or proposals.
Yeah, from my view as an outsider to the image spec, but an insider to the OCI, I thought that Josh's PR recently to remove some maintainers, while controversial on the face, was actually really good and really positive, and managed to get some kind of response from all of the remaining image spec maintainers, if I counted correctly. So that, like, it showed that there's some activity there, and that I think the image spec is very much alive at this point today after that PR. I think it would be interesting to do a PR like that to the runtime spec that still lists Michael at docker.com as a maintainer. But maybe less urgent because there's less important changes happening there, but there are PRs there that could use eyeballs from somebody who knows what they're looking at and knows what the implications of this will be. People like Alexa, who probably doesn't have enough time to actually spend on reviewing runtime spec PRs. It's a hard problem, realistically. So I guess I'm not proposing any solutions. I'm just throwing more problems in the pot. I'll mute now.
Okay, well, let's look at Josh's, well, it's an issue. It's not a PR. Last commented 2 days ago about a call, and besides Akihiro, there isn't another comment from a maintainer, and I am not sure if his assertion that asynchronous communications are working in this respect, because he's the only one that happened to notice. Sorry, Josh, go ahead. I'm not.
Oh, no, I just put it up. I just want to surface something that I wrote in the chat here. Well, other things were being said. I think having requirements is not. I don't think hard requirements is maybe the answer here. So I think we can solve the time zone issue by saying that's not a requirement. And the only requirement being that somebody from OCI who's already has a maintainer position nominates you. And then we can have, based on Rose's bullets, we can have a template for these types of PRs. And you just fill in the template and say this person does this and this and this, number of years they've been doing this and this, and a description of why you think they'd be a good maintainer. Because I think 90% of this comes down to the other maintainers feel very comfortable clicking the green button. It's not like, oh, they made 90 commits, but I've never heard of this person. It needs to be geared towards like triggering people's feelings. So I think we shouldn't have like hard requirements other than some baseline of needs to come from maintainer, and then yes, people are liking the template. So I think we can come up with a template based on that issue, and then we can close the Sajay Brandon PRs and reopen them with the template. And I'm feeling pretty confident these two will be added. And my big thing here is that the working group is where new stuff's happening, and we don't have people on image spec who know about that. So having Sajay and Brandon to be able to help us get things in was my primary thing. But to Tianan's point, yeah, let's we should do this cleanup everywhere and just like keep moving things.
Okay, so I guess next step is to create a maintainer evaluation template and a career, like not career, but like a ladder for contributors to become maintainers, or we don't need
I
the
think
ladder thingy.
Yeah, I think specifically a PR template. I think there's even in GitHub, there's like a way to make that.
Yeah, you
button you
can you can make that with the GitHub templates.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, Flavian, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. That they put a link that's how to do that. So let's do that. And I think we're good here. And we can use that across OCI too then.
Yeah, I've done this before, and if you want, I can submit a PR with a template.
Awesome. A PR for the PR.
Awesome. And actually, you know, I've been thinking about collecting all these governance processes that we've been doing in the working group and over here, and seeing if we can turn that into a standard for all three specs.
Yeah, that sounds great. We can use image spec as the guinea pig here, and then we can even go through TOB if we want, Nisha, and make that the common process for all the repos.
Yeah, let's see how it goes here.
So that all sounds reasonable. Is there any kind of follow-up we want to do? I guess one of the things Jason brought up that kind of made me think, there definitely are pretty regularly gaps where we just don't meet, or only a few people connect here. Like, is it worth thinking about like a more sporadic kind of regular meeting, whether it's twice a month or once a month? Because then it might give us more of the chance to like have two of them, like a APAC. And, if we can find one that's US plus Europe, then you only need one other, APAC friendly. Anyway, I don't know if people want to keep mulling over that. We don't have to make a decision, obviously, but it seems like the call in recent times is used more to try and spur on activity, just because there's been frustration about lack of things moving. And so the call at least gets people together who care enough to have the discussion and try and see how to make progress. But if you have more active maintainers and things are moving in the sense of like async, PRs, issues, flow of conversation, like this meeting, could go more in the direction of new ideas, or people that just want to get together and do triage every once in a while. I think Vincent had used it for that a few times. Anyway, those are just some ideas that maybe we can consider.
Maybe we can have a doodle poll to see who's available when.
Yeah,
Is that something we can mail out to the Open Containers dev mailing list?
yeah, and I think Amy has even done that on our behalf a few times, from LF OCI, like management perspective. Like, of course, that we don't have to have her do that, but yeah, we can use the dev list to gauge like interest level for various time zones.
Do we include the relevant work to gauge interest?
You mean it in the sense of like what topics are being discussed here? Like,
Yeah. What seem to be the most common topics that come up?
Yeah, or is it worth saying here? You can look at HackMD and kind of scroll and see kind of the flow of content, but maybe additionally for polling on time zones, polling on are there issues, OCI areas of interest that never come up in this meeting? And if those topics were here, 5 more people would come. I don't know. That gets a bit trickier because Doodle doesn't exactly support that kind of polling, but
Also, no one takes notes in this meeting.
yeah, you tried to help us, Nisha, and we've already failed you.
Well, there's no, so the reason why it works in the working groups, in the reference type working group is because there's a governance document that says somebody will be a note taker. And we have pretty gold and silver medals.
Nice.
And we say like, we really love you, note takers. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no, that's good point. We haven't culturally made that a worthy cause here, obviously.
But
So, yeah.
that's the whole point of a governance document, is that folks need some kind of direction on how to run these meetings. If like folks just join and sit and wait.
Yeah. Yeah, Flavian, that's a good point. Like, and I think you had done this for a meeting or two. Like, if step one of any meeting is like, who wants to take notes, then you kind of build it into the structure of the meeting.
Yeah, that's how the working group also does it. But I think we've had it enough times that the first thing that happens is somebody says, I'll take notes.
Yeah, nice. I guess we did it. I was just looking at, I guess we do have it in the template now, but we're not. I think the missing piece is kind of incorporating that into the meeting flow, just getting that done first thing.
I'll be happy to be the person who brings that up the very first thing.
Yeah, no, great. That would be good.
Okay, I'll do that for a little while, and let's see how it goes from there.
Cool. Anything else folks want to discuss? Or we give folks a few minutes back.
I just want to say thanks to everybody for trying to make progress on the maintainers thing. It seems small, but like I think there's a lot of people who want to do things in this community, but they can't. So I think we can keep making good steps in that direction.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and thanks to folks here. I know, Josh, you've been fighting that fight for a good while. So yeah, thanks. It's hasn't always been the easiest community to move forward, but yeah, it does seem like we're piecewise getting things in place to make things smoother. So that's good. Thanks to everybody. All right, cool. Well, I guess for those, I don't know if anyone here is headed to KubeCon, but I know Vincent and I should be there. Feel free to say hi if you're there, and it may mean, well, it may not mean much impact to this group next Thursday, but I know I won't be here and Vincent can't. So, but catch you in a couple weeks, personally. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.